Washington Mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
7:07 on WMAL. It's Washington's Mall, where Washington comes to talk. Coming up at the bottom of this hour at 7:35, Maryland Delegate Jolene Ivey talk about illegal immigrants and driver's license in the Free State. Then at 8:35, Representative Louis Gohmert from Texas joins us. Always lively when he's here. It's also lively for me, Larry O'Connor, when Dan Bongino's here.
Yes, he is.
In for Brian Wilson today. And welcome, Dan. Good to see you. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning to you as well, my friend.
Well, yesterday was day two of two back-to-back arguments in front of the Supreme Court over same-sex marriage. And joining us now to sort of sort through the legal aspects of this and what those Supreme Court justices might be contemplating is Supreme Court Justice expert. He's a constitutional lawyer and also the legal analyst over there at Breitbart News. He is Ken Klukowski. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, Larry. Great to be with you. Dan, thank you for having me, too.
Hey, good to talk to you, Ken.
So let's start first on one of the, I guess, the technicality part of this this suit, which I think is interesting. This is the Defense of Marriage Act yesterday, U.S. versus Windsor. And the fact is the Department of Justice and the Solicitor General, the White House, they decided they didn't want to defend the Defense of Marriage Act. So basically you've got both sides, the people who are against the Defense of Marriage Act and the government who won't defend it. They're sort of agreeing. So why is this even in front of the Supreme Court?
Well, that was a big question that came up, Larry, and I have to say I think there were two problems with the court considering the case, and I think the odds are about 50-50 that on the DOMA case they might kick it out. And since the questioning on the merits was less encouraging to me, I think that's probably the outcome I would like to see now, is just to see it, kicked out.
Ken Klukowski, draw that distinction for us. When you say kick it out, what does that mean? Does that mean...
That would be to say that under Article 3 of the Constitution, our federal judiciary, the third branch of government, only has jurisdiction, only has power to declare the law over certain types of lawsuits. And if it doesn't have all of those elements that are required by Article 3, then they are required to dismiss the suit, completely throw it out, vacate everything that's been done up to that point, so throwing out the lower court decisions and leaving it to another day.
So that basically means the arguments specific to U.S. versus Windsor would be resolved, but it wouldn't have any sort of precedential value on the overarching aspect of DOMA.
That's exactly right, Larry. It would not be a ruling on the merits, and because there were two problems with the Windsor case, but then one of those two problems is also a problem with every single DOMA case in the courts right now. So if the court were to go in that direction, not only would this case be dismissed, but all of these other cases would be dismissed as well. DOMA entirely would just wait until a future day.
All right, so now let's move on to the merits. You write in Breitbart News that you think that the fate may be in Justice Kennedy's hands, as we so often see. Now, there was one question that he asked yesterday that I think is, as a states' rights, non-big government, non-federal government interventionist type of conservative as I am, I have trouble with this line of questioning in terms of defending the Defense of Marriage Act. I want you to respond as if you were the counselor that Justice Kennedy were speaking to. Here's his question.
You are at real risk of running in conflict with what has always been thought to be the essence of the state police power, which is to regulate marriage, divorce, custody.
Counselor?
Well, if we lose, we're going, on my side, on the merits, we're going to lose on exactly that. There was confusion on Justice Kennedy's part as to whether the federal government here was regulating marriage. It's not. Federalism has two halves. One is that on most matters of law, the states are sovereign under their police power. The other half is, for those matters that are specified for the federal government as powers of Congress under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, for those matters and only those matters, we came up with this with Obamacare, the federal government gets to make its own rules. In this case, DOMA does not tell any state who can or cannot get married. It just says we as the federal government, in terms of the federal benefits that we will give, mainly economic benefits, Social Security, tax breaks, immigration, things that the Constitution permits us to do, we're saying that in our sphere of influence, marriage is between one man and one woman. But if any state wants to go off on a completely different direction, they can. Just as the federal government cannot dictate to the states who can be married, The states cannot dictate to the federal government who Congress is going to spend money on.
You know, Ken, this is more of a cosmic question, umbrella view, but your experience with these Supreme Court cases, do you feel that they're influenced by listen, there's passion on both sides of this issue. I don't think we can question that, but it seems that, the lobby on the homosexual lobby seems to have really moved on this and moved quickly and, to their political credit, has swayed public opinion evidenced by the polls relatively quickly. Do you think that has any effect on the justices and how they rule? Again, more of an umbrella view question on this.
Well, it's a good question, Dan. I think to the extent it does not at all impact them in terms of feeling intimidated or something like that.
Right.
In terms of impacting their thinking in other ways, to the extent that it does, it ironically helps the traditional marriage side, because one of the aspects of the question here is not whether same-sex marriage, gay marriage, or polygamy or anything else, whether it's good policy or bad policy. The question is, this is more the Prop 8 case than the DOMA case that I'm saying. The question here would be whether this is an issue that should be left to democracy, left to the voters to decide, which would mean all 50 states voting on them like they did in California, or is this an issue that the Constitution takes away from the hands of the voters and says that unelected judges will decree a national rule for us all. As an element of that, as someone like Anthony Kennedy sees gay rights supporters succeeding at the ballot box and succeeding in public opinion polls, that should lead him to shrug and say, well, this court should not intervene in that democratic debate. It looks like the people are working it out themselves.
Ken Klukowski, you mentioned the Prop 8 case that was heard on Monday. Between these two cases, Prop 8 and DOMA, when do you expect to have some decisions coming down, and will they coincide? Will the decisions be in tandem?
Well, if for some reason they're dismissing for lack of jurisdiction in either case, and there is a question in both cases, though again I think the odds are small that they will throw out the California case on a jurisdictional technicality, but about 50-50 they could do it in the DOMA case. That could happen in April, it could happen in May, but I would expect whether it's on jurisdiction or on the merits, I think it's most likely that we're going to get a decision around the last week of June.
All right, and Ken Klukowski, legal analyst for Breitbart News and constitutional law expert. We expect to have you here to explain what that decision means when it comes down.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen.
All right, Ken Klukowski, thanks for joining us. It's always interesting because we've talked about so many facets of this story. It affects people on a personal level, on a family basis, on a faith basis, but ultimately this is all about the Constitution.
You know, Larry, everybody has a friend or a family member who's gay, and when you put a face on something, it's very hard. I understand both sides of this argument and the passions. It's a very rich, layered argument, and, I get it. I get both sides. I see it.
I agree, too, and thankfully for me, I was there in California when Prop 8 happened, and it wasn't pretty. It was really ugly on both sides of the issue, and I believe, in my opinion, I could be wrong, but I think this last week where this has been such a hot topic, I think both sides have been really respectful and really caring of each other, and you haven't heard the name calling, and you haven't heard people being called bigot or bad racial sexual epithets. I'm proud of how the conversation's gone, actually.
Yeah, and that's typically the default position of some on the left.
Unfortunately.